The Times is reporting the president is asking DOJ to pay him $230 million for his past cases. Is that appropriate considering it's a department under his control?
I'm not going to comment on something I haven't read, so I'm not sure what you're talking about.
And what, if anything, is being done to try to rein him in? Just this week, Trump called for more of his political rivals to be prosecuted, issued a controversial pardon, and said that the Department of Justice owes him money. Meanwhile, in the House, Democrats have launched a probe into Trump's demands for the Justice Department to pay him up to $230 million as a potential settlement for previous investigations.
Sound from your House Speaker, Mike Johnson, before and after he claimed to have read the New York Times report about the $230 million, but he still didn't know either way.
Yeah.
Some Democrats refuse to stand idly by and are taking action. Senators Adam Schiff and Elizabeth Warren have introduced a resolution to officially condemn.
All right, so what happened at the Supreme Court on Friday is absolutely explosive, and it could be the scandal that finally brings down Trump's entire prosecutorial operation against his political enemies. We're talking about a Trump-appointed prosecutor, Lindsey Halligan, getting caught red-handed leaking confidential grand jury information to a journalist. And this didn't just happen in some random case. This happened in cases directly tied to Trump's vendetta prosecutions against people like New York Attorney General Letitia James and former FBI Director James Comey. Halligan was Trump's personal lawyer before he made her a U.S. attorney, despite her having no prosecutorial experience. And now she's been exposed as leaking sensitive case details through encrypted messaging, violating DOJ confidentiality rules, potentially committing crimes, and destroying what little credibility Trump's Justice Department had left. The revelation came during Supreme Court proceedings on Trump's executive authority, forcing justices to adjourn for private deliberations because they were so disturbed by evidence of prosecutorial misconduct tied directly to the president's office. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust headlines anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
Timothy Mellon is, as the New York Times reported, a reclusive billionaire, a major financial backer of Trump, and is the anonymous donor who gave this money to the U.S. government to help pay the troops during the shutdown. What are House oversight Democrats doing about?
The only appropriations of money from the federal government that are allowable come from Congress. Only Congress can appropriate money. So if somebody gave us $500 billion or gave Trump $500 billion, he'd have to turn it over to the U.S. Treasury, and the appropriation is only lawful if it comes from Congress. But look, the bottom line is what we're saying to the billionaires of America is pay your taxes.
Let me walk you through how this all unfolded, because the details are absolutely damning. According to Yahoo News reporting from October 21st, Halligan admitted in private communications with a journalist that she discussed sensitive grand jury information involving Trump's directive to prosecute Letitia James. Grand jury information is sacrosanct in the legal system. It's supposed to be completely confidential. Prosecutors take an oath not to disclose grand jury deliberations. The whole point of grand jury secrecy is to protect the integrity of investigations, to protect witnesses, and to ensure that people aren't smeared by accusations if the grand jury decides not to indict. When prosecutors leak grand jury information, that's not just an ethical violation, it's potentially a criminal violation. And Halligan apparently admitted to doing exactly that. She told a journalist about what was happening in grand jury proceedings related to the Letitia James prosecution. And that journalist presumably was going to publish or broadcast that information, which would taint the entire proceeding and could lead to the case being thrown out. The fact that Halligan was discussing Trump's directive to prosecute Letitia James is also significant because it confirms what we've been discussing, that Trump has been personally directing prosecutions of his political enemies. Halligan isn't some independent prosecutor who decided based on evidence that Letitia James should be investigated. She's implementing Trump's directives, she's doing Trump's bidding, and she was apparently bragging about it, or at least discussing it with journalists in ways that violated her professional obligations. That shows consciousness of the politicization. Halligan knew she was part of Trump's political prosecution operation, and she was apparently comfortable enough with that to discuss it with outsiders, which shows how normalized this corruption has become within Trump's Justice Department. Glenn Kirshner, a former federal prosecutor who's been covering Trump's legal issues extensively, reported on October 24th that Halligan's Signal chats became central evidence during the Supreme Court sessions. Signal is an encrypted messaging app that people use when they want their communications to be private and secure. The fact that Halligan was using Signal to communicate with journalists about grand jury matters suggests she knew what she was doing was wrong and was trying to hide it. But the messages apparently got discovered anyway, probably through the journalist's phone or through some disclosure during the litigation. And opposing counsel, the lawyers representing the people Trump is trying to prosecute, introduced these Signal chats as evidence of prosecutorial misconduct tied directly to the president's office. That's devastating, because it's not just one rogue prosecutor behaving badly. It's evidence of a systematic problem where Trump's appointees are violating ethical rules and legal requirements to advance Trump's political agenda. The Associated Press reported on October 23rd that Halligan's appointment itself is now under investigation. And this is a crucial point. Halligan lacked prior prosecutorial experience, yet was appointed as a U.S. attorney and given responsibility for presenting Trump's retaliatory cases against multiple state officials, including Letitia James and James Comey. U.S. attorneys are supposed to be experienced prosecutors with sterling reputations and proven track records. The job requires managing complex investigations, making charging decisions, trying cases, and upholding the integrity of the justice system. Halligan had none of that background. She was Trump's personal lawyer. Her qualification was loyalty to Trump, not prosecutorial competence. And Trump appointed her specifically to handle his vendetta cases. That's corrupt patronage. That's using the Justice Department as Trump's personal law firm rather than as an independent institution that serves the public interest. SCOTUS blog reported on October 23rd that this revelation disrupted the Supreme Court's hearing on Trump's executive power claims. The justices were reviewing Trump's emergency petition related to executive authority and prosecution powers. These are the cases we've been discussing, where Trump claims he has broad authority to direct prosecutions and to use DOJ for his political purposes. The Supreme Court was considering Trump's legal arguments, but then opposing counsel introduced evidence of Halligan's misconduct. And that evidence was so disturbing that the justices had to adjourn for private deliberation. They needed to assess whether the leak compromises procedural integrity, whether cases built on politicized prosecutions with prosecutors leaking grand jury information can proceed at all, whether the Supreme Court should be hearing cases that are so tainted by misconduct. That's an extraordinary disruption. Supreme Court justices don't lightly adjourn proceedings. The fact that they felt compelled to do so tells you how serious this misconduct is. And here's what makes this even more explosive. This isn't just about Halligan's individual misconduct. This is about the entire Trump prosecution operation being exposed as corrupt. If Halligan is leaking grand jury information and violating ethical rules in the James and Comey cases, what's happening in Trump's other vendetta prosecutions? Are other Trump-appointed prosecutors engaging in similar misconduct? Is this systematic throughout DOJ? And if the cases against Trump's enemies are built on prosecutorial misconduct, do those cases need to be dismissed? Can any prosecution by Trump's DOJ be trusted? These are the questions that are now swirling, and they threaten to unravel everything Trump has been trying to do with his politicized Justice Department. So yeah, this is massive. This is potentially the scandal that exposes Trump's entire abuse of prosecutorial power. Let's break down what happened and what it means. Okay, so let's dig into the legal and ethical framework here, because understanding why Halligan's conduct is so problematic requires understanding the rules that govern prosecutors and grand jury proceedings. Grand jury secrecy is one of the most sacred principles in American criminal law. Rule 6E of the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure specifically prohibits disclosure of matters occurring before a grand jury, except in very limited circumstances. Prosecutors, grand jurors, and court personnel are all bound by this rule. They can't talk about what happens in the grand jury room. They can't discuss what witnesses said. They can't reveal what evidence was presented. They can't disclose whether the grand jury is considering charging someone. All of that information is confidential, and there are very good reasons for these rules. First, grand jury secrecy protects the reputations of people under investigation who are never charged. If grand jury proceedings were public, someone could be smeared by accusations, even if the grand jury decided there wasn't enough evidence to indict. Second, secrecy protects witnesses who might be afraid to testify if their testimony will become public. Third, secrecy prevents subjects of investigation from fleeing or destroying evidence. And fourth, secrecy ensures that grand jurors can deliberate freely without public pressure or influence. When prosecutors violate grand jury secrecy, they're attacking all of those important interests, and they're potentially committing crimes. Unauthorized disclosure of grand jury materials can be prosecuted as contempt of court. It can result in sanctions, including fines, removal from cases, and referral to bar associations for disciplinary proceedings, up to and including disbarment. So when Halligan admitted to discussing sensitive grand jury information with the journalist, she admitted to conduct that could end her career and potentially result in criminal penalties. And she did it in the context of politically charged prosecutions that were already controversial. That shows incredibly poor judgment at best and criminal intent at worst. The fact that Halligan used Signal for these communications is also revealing. Signal is an encrypted messaging app that's designed to provide secure communications that can't easily be intercepted. Journalists use it to protect sources. Whistleblowers use it to communicate with reporters without being detected. And people engaging in potentially illegal conduct use it because they think the encryption will protect them from discovery. Halligan's use of Signal suggests she knew that discussing grand jury information with journalists was wrong and that she was trying to hide it. If her communications were proper and above board, she would have used normal email or phone calls. The fact that she chose an encrypted app shows consciousness of wrongdoing. She was trying to keep her leaks secret, but as often happens, the attempt at secrecy failed. The messages were discovered, probably because the journalist was subpoenaed or because someone involved in the conversations disclosed them, and now those messages are evidence of Halligan's misconduct. The content of Halligan's leaks is also significant. According to Yahoo News, she was discussing Trump's directive to prosecute Letitia James. That reveals several problems. First, it confirms that Trump personally directed this prosecution. It's not just Halligan deciding independently based on evidence that James should be charged. Trump told her to go after James. That's politicization of prosecutions. Second, Halligan was apparently comfortable discussing Trump's directives with journalists. That suggests the political nature of these prosecutions is an open secret within Trump's Justice Department. People know they're implementing Trump's political agenda rather than pursuing independent justice, and they're not even trying to hide it very effectively. Third, Halligan was leaking information about grand jury proceedings in a case that's extraordinarily sensitive. Letitia James is a state attorney general who brought civil fraud charges against Trump. Trump's prosecution of her is widely seen as retaliation, so any information about that case needs to be handled with extreme care, and Halligan was instead leaking it to journalists. The question of why Halligan was leaking is also important. There are a few possibilities. Maybe she was trying to intimidate James or her allies by letting them know that the grand jury was progressing toward indictment. Maybe she was trying to generate favorable media coverage for Trump by showing that his enemies were under serious investigation. Maybe she was trying to curry favor with Trump by demonstrating her loyalty through leaks that advance his political interests. Or maybe she's just incredibly unprofessional and didn't understand or care about grand jury secrecy rules. Any of those explanations is damning because none of them involve Halligan acting as an ethical prosecutor focused on justice. They all involve her acting as a political operative focused on advancing Trump's agenda. Halligan's lack of prosecutorial experience before being appointed as U.S. attorney is a huge red flag that should have prevented her from getting the job in the first place. U.S. attorneys are supposed to be among the most qualified and experienced prosecutors in the country. They manage dozens or hundreds of prosecutors. They handle the most sensitive and complex federal cases. They need sound judgment, deep knowledge of criminal law and procedure, and unquestionable integrity. Halligan had none of that. She was Trump's personal lawyer. That's not qualification to be a U.S. attorney. That's a political connection. Trump gave her the job because she was loyal, not because she was qualified. And now we're seeing the consequences. A prosecutor without proper training or experience doesn't understand or doesn't care about fundamental rules like grand jury secrecy. She sees her role as advancing Trump's interests rather than upholding the law, and that leads to the kind of misconduct we're seeing here. The fact that Halligan was given responsibility for Trump's retaliatory cases against state officials is also telling. Why would you assign politically sensitive cases to someone with no prosecutorial experience? The only explanation is that Trump wanted someone he could trust to do what he wanted, regardless of whether it was proper or legal. Experienced prosecutors with established reputations might push back. They might say, Mr. President, we can't charge Letitia James just because she prosecuted you. We need actual evidence of crimes. But Halligan, as Trump's loyalist without prosecutorial background, would just do what Trump wanted. She's not going to question Trump's judgment or resist his directives. She's going to implement his agenda. And that's exactly what Trump wanted. He wanted prosecutors who would be weapons in his political battles rather than independent legal professionals who would constrain him. The impact on the Supreme Court proceedings is also significant. The justices were considering Trump's claims of broad executive authority over prosecutions. Trump's lawyers were arguing that the president has discretion to direct prosecutions and that courts shouldn't second-guess those decisions. But then, opposing counsel introduced evidence that Trump's prosecutor is leaking grand jury information and violating ethical rules. That completely undermines Trump's arguments, because if Trump's prosecutors are behaving unethically and breaking rules, why should courts defer to Trump's prosecutorial decisions? The evidence of misconduct suggests that Trump's Justice Department can't be trusted to act professionally and ethically, and that means courts need to exercise more oversight, not less. So Halligan's misconduct actually strengthens the case for judicial review of Trump's prosecutorial actions. It proves that without oversight, Trump's prosecutors will abuse their power. The fact that the Supreme Court justices adjourned for private deliberation shows they're taking this seriously. They could have just ignored the allegations and continued with the hearing. but they apparently felt the misconduct was serious enough that they needed to pause and consider the implications. Maybe they're considering whether to refer Halligan to the Attorney General for investigation. Maybe they're considering whether the cases she's handling are so tainted by misconduct that they should be dismissed. Maybe they're reconsidering Trump's legal arguments in light of evidence that his Justice Department is corrupt. We don't know what the justices are discussing privately, but the fact that they felt compelled to adjourn tells you they're deeply concerned about what this revelation means for the integrity of the legal system. All right, let's break down what the Lindsey Halligan scandal actually means going forward for Trump's prosecutions and for his presidency more broadly. Because at this point, you're probably wondering, okay, Trump's prosecutor got caught leaking, but what are the consequences? Will she be held accountable? Will the cases she's handling be dismissed? And what does this mean for Trump's broader strategy of using DOJ to attack his enemies? Let me give you 3 key takeaways. First, Halligan is almost certainly going to face severe professional consequences, including possible disbarment and criminal prosecution. The evidence of her misconduct appears to be clear and documented. She admitted in signal messages to discussing sensitive grand jury information with a journalist. That violates Rule 6E, that violates her professional obligations as a prosecutor, and that potentially violates criminal statutes against unauthorized disclosure of grand jury materials. Bar associations take grand jury violations extremely seriously. When prosecutors leak confidential information, they usually get disbarred because the legal profession can't tolerate prosecutors who violate fundamental ethical rules. It destroys public confidence in the justice system. So state bar associations where Halligan is licensed are probably going to open disciplinary proceedings. They're going to investigate the allegations, and if the facts are as reported, they're going to suspend or disbar her. Additionally, judges in the cases Halligan is handling might refer her to DOJ's Office of Professional Responsibility for Investigation. OPR investigates allegations of misconduct by DOJ attorneys. They have the power to recommend sanctions, including termination, and in egregious cases, they can refer matters to prosecutors for criminal charges. So Halligan could face an OPR investigation on top of bar disciplinary proceedings, and if DOJ has any institutional integrity left, they'll investigate this seriously rather than trying to protect one of Trump's loyalists. Of course, that assumes Trump doesn't try to shut down any investigation of Halligan. He could order the Attorney General to drop it. He could fire anyone who tries to investigate his hand-picked prosecutor, but doing so would be yet another obstruction and would generate enormous political backlash. So Trump faces a choice: let Halligan be held accountable and accept that it makes him look bad, or protect her and confirm that his Justice Department is completely corrupt and that loyalty to Trump trumps ethics and law. Second, the cases that Halligan has been handling are now vulnerable to dismissal or at least to serious legal challenges. When prosecutorial misconduct occurs, defendants can move to dismiss charges or to suppress evidence or to disqualify the prosecutor. And if misconduct is serious enough, judges will grant those motions. In the Letitia James case, James's lawyers are going to argue that the entire prosecution is tainted by Halligan's misconduct and by political motivations. They're going to say, this prosecutor leaked grand jury information in violation of law. She was appointed despite having no qualifications. She's implementing Trump's personal directives rather than exercising independent prosecutorial judgment, and therefore the case should be dismissed. That's a strong argument, and even if the case isn't dismissed entirely, the judge might disqualify Halligan and require DOJ to assign new prosecutors. But new prosecutors might look at the case and decide there's insufficient evidence to proceed. They might drop charges. So Halligan's misconduct could end up destroying the very prosecutions Trump wanted her to pursue. The same analysis applies to the James Comey case and any other prosecutions Halligan has been involved in. All of them are now vulnerable to challenges based on her misconduct. Defense lawyers are going to argue selective prosecution, vindictive prosecution, violation of grand jury secrecy, and any other theory they can think of. And judges are going to be receptive to those arguments because the evidence of misconduct is so clear. So Trump's entire vendetta prosecution operation might collapse because he appointed a loyal but incompetent and unethical prosecutor who couldn't follow basic rules. That would be fitting in a way. Trump's corruption and his prioritization of loyalty over competence, creating the circumstances that destroy his own agenda. But it would also be deeply troubling for the country because it means we've wasted enormous resources on political prosecutions that never should have been brought. And it means people like Letitia James and James Comey have been put through the stress and expense of defending against criminal charges that were brought in bad faith. The political fallout is also significant. Democrats in Congress are going to use Halligan's misconduct as evidence that Trump has completely weaponized the Justice Department. They're going to hold hearings. They're going to call witnesses, including possibly Halligan herself. They're going to subpoena documents related to her appointment and her handling of cases. And they're going to build a public record showing that Trump appointed an unqualified loyalist gave her politically motivated cases to prosecute, and that she then violated ethical and legal rules in pursuing those cases. That narrative is devastating for Trump. It confirms everything his critics have been saying about the politicization of justice, and it gives Democrats powerful ammunition heading into 2026. They can run on the argument that Trump is corrupt, that he uses government power to attack his enemies, and that even his own prosecutors get caught breaking the law in service of his political vendettas. Republicans are going to have a hard time defending this. Some will try to dismiss it as a minor technical violation or as a partisan attack on Halligan, but the facts are too clear and the violation too serious. Grand jury secrecy is a bedrock principle that even Republicans who support Trump understand is important. And Halligan's lack of qualifications, combined with her appointment to handle politically sensitive cases, makes the corruption obvious even to people predisposed to give Trump the benefit of the doubt. So Republicans in competitive districts are going to try to distance themselves from this scandal. They're going to say they support law and order and ethical prosecutions, and they'll quietly criticize Halligan's conduct without necessarily criticizing Trump directly. But that distinction is going to be hard to maintain because Halligan is Trump's creature. She wouldn't be in this position if Trump hadn't appointed her. Her misconduct is Trump's responsibility. Third, this scandal further erodes whatever institutional integrity the Justice Department had left, and that erosion has consequences that go beyond Trump's presidency. The Justice Department depends on public trust. People have to believe that prosecutors are fair, that they follow the law, that they pursue justice rather than political agendas. When that trust is destroyed, the entire criminal justice system is undermined. Why should anyone cooperate with federal investigations if they think prosecutors are just political hacks? Why should juries believe federal prosecutors if they think the whole system is corrupt? Why should foreign governments share intelligence with U.S. law enforcement if they think information will be misused for political purposes? All of those questions are now more acute because of Halligan's conduct and because of the broader pattern of politicization under Trump. Rebuilding trust in DOJ after Trump eventually leaves office is going to be extraordinarily difficult. It's going to require major reforms, independent oversight mechanisms, stricter ethics rules, transparent appointment processes that ensure U.S. attorneys are qualified rather than just politically connected, congressional legislation that limits presidential authority to direct specific prosecutions. All of these reforms have been discussed but never implemented because there was enough trust in norms and institutional culture, but Trump has destroyed those norms, and Halligan's misconduct is just the latest example of what happens when you prioritize loyalty over competence and when you use law enforcement as a political weapon. So future administrations, whether Democratic or Republican, are going to have to grapple with how to restore DOJ's independence and integrity, and that's going to be a long, difficult process that might take years or even decades. The international reputation damage is also significant. America has long positioned itself as a champion of the rule of law. We've criticized other countries for having politicized justice systems where prosecutors serve the leader rather than the law. But how can we make that criticism now when our own Justice Department is operating exactly that way? How can we promote the rule of law globally when we're not following it at home? Trump's politicization of DOJ and scandals like Halligan's misconduct undermine America's soft power and our ability to influence other countries toward democratic norms and practices, and that damage is going to last long after Trump is gone, because other countries are going to remember that America's commitment to the rule of law was situational and could be abandoned when a corrupt leader took power. So yeah, that's where we are. Lindsey Halligan, Trump's handpicked prosecutor with no experience, got caught leaking grand jury information to a journalist. The scandal erupted during Supreme Court proceedings. Justices adjourned in concern, and now Halligan faces possible disbarment and criminal charges, while the cases she's been handling are vulnerable to dismissal. This is the inevitable result of Trump's corruption and his prioritization of loyalty over competence and ethics. And it's one more step in the destruction of institutional integrity that defines Trump's presidency.